Hello, hello. Your favorite smooth voiced and tired boy is here. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Anything nice happen? Hopefully, you've all been taking care of yourself. Hi, Jinx. It's always great to see you. How are you doing? You're doing okay? That's wonderful, Core. Or, well, I guess I should say it's more okay. But we're here to make it better. Ah, I missed you all yesterday, but I was really exhausted. I got home and went to bed almost immediately. So, after some much needed rest, I I'm back. So for today, of course, we're going to be here talking, having a wonderful time together, and I, of course, have more book to read. But before we go back in to Fellowship of the Ring, last time I was going to read from the Choose Your Own Adventure books. Last time you all wanted the magic of the unicorn, so I figured that would be a fun place to start out. Some fun interaction. It's also really funny. I learn about something, and then next thing you know, it's everywhere. It's like when somebody gets a new car and they point it out, and the next thing you know, you see that car everywhere. Like, I remember a friend of mine bought a big old, almost Hummer type. It's this big giant car that I had never seen before. And over the next few months, I spotted like 10 more in town. So that was interesting. It's like, oh, why did I never notice this before? Could be I just wasn't paying attention. Had no reason to know. But it's just interesting to point out. Don't mind me yapping. Just having a good time. As the days are getting colder, I like to think about ways of staying warm. I know I usually like to bundle up, maybe have a blanket on hand, run around the house like a little hermit. How do you guys like to stay warm? Maybe some hot drinks, perhaps a heated blanket. Maybe you just turn the heater on. We do have some tiny space heaters here, but I don't know if I really need to turn it on yet. Maybe. All right. So, we'll go ahead and begin with the little book. And I will go with the first response I see. If anyone says anything, cool. If no one says anything, I get to pick. Always dangerous. Here we go. The summer of 1507 is exceptionally dry throughout Flanders. Fires scorch the forests, crops wither, and animals collapse from thirst. Nowhere is the drought as severe as your own small village. Just last week, when you went to check the dwindling water supply, you discovered a dead rat floating in the well upon which everyone depended. Since then, the water has been foul and tainted. The barrels of rainwater are nearly empty, and all attempts to dig a new well have yielded nothing but empty earth. One morning, after weeding the field you inherited when your parents died 10 years ago, you pay a visit to Marie Claire. She is the oldest person in the village and one of your special friends. Some people say this might be the last summer any of us lives to see, you tell her sadly. None of the other villages around has enough water to share with us, and it's hopeless to keep trying to dig a new well. I wish there was something I could do about it. Maria Claire looks up from her knitting. You could try to lure a unicorn into the well. Why, the touch of its horn purifies even poison. But Marie Claire, you exclaim. Around here, unicorns are rarer than water. I bet it would be easier to find the sorceress than a unicorn. That's a good idea, she replies. I'm sure the sorceress knows all about unicorns. Why don't you look for her? No one has seen her in years, you remind Marie Claire. The last person you tried to find her never returned. Ah, but you are 10 times smarter than anyone who has ever searched for the sorceress. If anyone can find her, it is you. Although you feel flattered, you are not sure you are really clever enough. Well, I'll give it a try. I wonder if I still remember that riddle describing the way to find the sorceress. Is this right? You take a deep breath and recite, near a land reserved for woe, in a place that's high but low. Watch which way the bat doth go. Find me there, and I will know. Perfect, says Marie Claire, as she hands you a glass pendant shaped like a raindrop. Put on my good luck talisman. Use it as you need it, my friend. You say goodbye to Marie Claire, then roam the parched fields. After pondering the riddle, you think of 2 places reserved for woe. The sorceress could mean the village graveyard or the small camp outside the village where 2 men who suffer from leprosy live in gloomy isolation. We can either choose to go to the leper camp or we can head for the graveyard. Ah, I do recall talking about living next to a graveyard and some strange spooky occurrences. But we're no longer in spooky season. So, no need to talk about it. Hee hee hee. You know what? I like graveyards better. Plus it feels more permanent than a camp. Even though the path to the graveyard is all downhill, you are hot and thirsty by the time you arrive there. You sit in the shade of a drooping tree to cool off. As you watch the parched leaves float to the dusty ground, you consider the next line of the riddle. In a place that's high, but low. What can be both high and low? Looking around, you notice the rolling slopes of the hills along the far side of the graveyard. They seem to be both high and low, but the church bell rings, striking noon. Turning, You realize the steeple of the church also fits the riddle. The church itself is in a low valley, but the steeple towers high above the village. Hmm. I feel like it's best to go to the hill. You decide to climb to the top of the highest hill. Once there, you wipe your brow and look around. Feeling a little perplexed, you remind yourself of the next line of the riddle. Watch which way the bat doth go, but there are no bats in sight. As you pace about impatiently, wondering what to do, you come upon a cave opening near the top of the hill. You poke your head inside, but it's too dark to see anything. Hello, hello, you call, but only your own voice echoes back. The cave seems like a perfect place to find a bat, and maybe even the sorceress as well. You can either wait, or you can go into the cave. It does say to watch for the bat, but I don't think forcing a bat is a good idea. I'm going to wait. Sweat streams down your face as you wait by the cave. At sunset, you finally spotted a bat zigzagging through the air. Instead of flying into the cave beside you, it soars to the side of the hill when you follow it into a second cave you haven't seen before. You shiver with excitement as you grope your way through the darkness, listening to the sounds of the beating wings. Suddenly, lightning streaks across your path, striking the ground just inches from your toes. Before you can catch your breath, a second bolt flashes, followed immediately by yet another. Your heart is pounding with terror when you hear someone mutter, "Magic Mother of Merlin, where's the thunder?" "Who's there?" you call nervously. An enormous flash of lightning illuminates the cave, revealing a wizened old woman draped in purple velvet. "A visitor!" she exclaims. And the next thing you know, daylight has replaced the darkness. "Congratulations," she cackles. "It's been 261 years since anyone has been able to find me. I hope I didn't scare you. I was just practicing my storms. For the life of me, I can't get the thunder to work." Open your mouth to say hello, but instead of your voice, a deep rumble of thunder emerges from the back of your throat. "There's the thunder," she shrieks gleefully. You are afraid to open your mouth again. "Don't be shy," says the sorceress warmly. "I want to know where you've come from." Hesitantly, you part your lips a bit. No thunder roars, so you tell the sorceress about the tainted water in the village well. She shakes her head. "So sorry to disappoint you, but I can't clean up that mess in your well. Water is not my domain. Never has been, never will be. Why, I can't even create rain to go with my lightning, and now thunder." You are undaunted. "What about unicorns? Do you know anything about them?" you ask the sorceress. "I've heard they can purify water." The words have barely left your lips when you see a handsome unicorn stepping lightly around the cave. You reach out to stroke its flank, but the unicorn vanishes abruptly. "Have you ever seen a real unicorn?" you ask. "Several times," she replies casually. "There's a unicorn living right here in the forest." "Can you tell me where to find it in the forest?" She shakes her head. "I'm afraid not, but I should be able to help you some other way. If you'll excuse me, I'm going to change into something more comfortable. I always think more clearly as the wind. Just an illusion, the sorceress explains. It's as close as I can come to creating a real unicorn, but it's no good for cleaning water. You watch with astonishment as she flings her purple robe over her shoulder and spins until she seems to be a lavender tornado. Next thing you know, the tornado fades and a cold wind rushes around the cave, howling and shrieking. A violet cloud slowly forms, and from it the sorceress emerges. I've got it, she announces breathlessly. I can cast one of two spells that may help you find the unicorn and give you the power to speak with animals, or I can knit you a golden net for catching magical beasts. Take your pick. I don't think the unicorn would like us very much if we caught it. If we could just talk to it, though, perhaps we could convince it. The unicorns are... Depends on the lore, but they can be very vain. But sometimes they are gentle, helpful spirits. I think I want to talk to animals. Even if you can't find the unicorn, you'll have fun talking with other animals, says the sorceress. She scoops a handful of brown flakes from a basket. What is that? Ears and tongues from 12 creatures, she explains. You look away with disgust as she puts the flakes into a bowl and crushes them into a powder. Ready? The sorceress carefully spoons the powder into each of your ears. Open your mouth. Now, don't worry. This will dissolve and you won't taste it at all. She places a dab under your tongue. You can barely tell it's there. How do I know if it works? Go ahead and try it, she suggests. Call my bat. Bat! Hey, bat, you shout, feeling a little silly. Within seconds, the creature flutters towards you and squeaks. You call? Please lead me to the forest. You thank the sorceress, then follow the bat out of the cave and through the hills to the edge of the moonlit forest. Then you say goodbye to the bat. Hearing a rustling in the branches above, you call, Hello? An owl swoops out of the darkness, startling you as it lands on your shoulder. You must be the friend of the sorceress, it hoots. Yes, I am. The well in my village is tainted, so I'm looking for a unicorn to clean the water. You'll have to decide whether you want just the horn or the unicorn itself, says the owl. Why? This afternoon, a warlock cut off the horn of the only unicorn I know. I'm not sure how magical the unicorn is without it, but I'm willing to bet the horn hasn't made the warlock any less wicked. That demon isn't going to be eager to lend you his new treasure. I can lead you to either, but neither one may be useful. I want the unicorn. Let's go to page 55. The owl flaps its wings to the unicorn. You hurry after the owl, stumbling on roots and thrashing on brambles. Slow down, you call. I can't see in the dark as well as you can. Human beings, hoots the owl scornfully. Why don't you sleep now, and we'll go to the unicorn in the morning? Good idea, you reply. You curl up at the foot of the oak tree and soon drift to a deep and dreamless sleep. When you awake the next morning, the owl is perched on your shoulder. So glad I suggested I rest, you say as you stretch your arms. I feel great. Good. Now let's get going. You can eat some berries along the way. Here. The two of you make your way through the sun-streaked forest. Even though you know the unicorn has lost its horn, you feel certain you'll find a way to clean the well. Maybe the unicorn could tell me where to find another unicorn, one that still has its horn, you chatter happily. I bet the unicorn must know all kinds of ways to clean water. You soon reach a small clearing. There, a crowd of woodland animals is gathered around the unicorn, who is lying on the ground. Oh no, moans the owl. What's wrong, you ask? Is the unicorn sleeping? I don't mind waiting. The animals turn to stare at you. You're too late, says the squirrel. The unicorn is dead. And I've hit game over. Man. Well, I suppose that happens sometimes. Can't win 'em all. Guess should have gone after the warlock. We can try that next time, though. I remember many years ago riding a horse. Not a unicorn, of course, those aren't real. But it was an interesting experience. Just trying to maintain balance and be respectful to the creature. After it followed the lead of the main horse on the trail, I remember the one I was on specifically was tired, so when we finished going along the trail, it just kept walking towards its stable. I had to jump off real quick to not bang my head against the roof. And then we're just like, oh, guess you're done. Okay. Oh, silly. All right. Well, now we'll start Chapter 10, Strider. Frodo, Pippin, and Sam made their way back to the parlor. There was no light. Mary was not there, and the fire had burned low. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown a couple of logs in that they discovered Strider had come with them. There, he was calmly sitting in a chair by the door. "Hello," said Pippin. "Who are you and what do you want?" "I am called Strider," he answered, "and though he may have forgotten it, your friend promised to have a quiet talk with me." "You said I might hear something to my advantage, I believe," said Frodo. "What have you to say?" "Several things," answered Strider, "but of course, I have my price." "What do you mean?" asked Frodo sharply. "Don't be alarmed. I mean just this. I will tell you what I know and give you some good advice, but I shall want a reward." "And what will that be, pray?" said Frodo. He suspected now that he had fallen in with a rascal, and he thought uncomfortably that he had brought only a little money with him. All of it would hardly satisfy a rogue, and he could not spare any of it. "No more than you can afford," answered Strider, with a slow smile, as if he guessed Frodo's thoughts. "Hi, Jam Jam. To see you. How are you doing?" Just this. You're good? That's great. You must take me along with you until I wish to leave you. Oh, indeed, replied Frodo, surprised, but not much relieved. Thank you, Jam Jam. Even if I wanted another companion, I should not agree to any such thing until I knew a good deal more about you and your business. Excellent, exclaimed Strider, crossing his legs and sitting back comfortably. You seem to be coming to your senses again, and that is all to the good. You have been much too careless so far. Very well, I will tell you what I know and leave the reward to you. You may be glad to grant it when you have heard me. Go on then, said Frodo. What do you know? Too much. Too many dark things, said Strider grimly. But as for your business, he got up and went to the door, opened it quickly, and looked out. Then he shut it quietly and sat down again. I have quick ears, he went on, lowering his voice, and, though I cannot disappear, I have hunted many wild and wary things, and I can usually avoid being seen, if I wish. Now, I was behind the hedge this evening, on the road west of Bree, when 4 hobbits came out of the downlands. I need not repeat all that they said to old Bombadil, or to one another, but one thing interested me. Please remember, he said one of them, that the name Baggins must not be mentioned. I am Mr. Underhill, if any name must be given. That interested me so much that I followed them here. I slipped over the gate just behind them. Maybe Mr. Baggins has an honest reason for leaving his name behind, but if so, I should advise him and his friends to be more careful. I don't see what interest my name has for anyone in Bree, said Frodo angrily. And I have still to learn why it interests you, Mr. Strider. May I have an honest reason for spying and eavesdropping? But if so, I should advise him to explain it. Well answered, said Strider, laughing. But the explanation is simple. I was looking for a hobbit named Frodo Baggins. I wanted to find him quickly. I had learned that he was carrying out of the Shire, well, a secret that concerned me and my friends. Now, don't mistake me, he cried as Frodo rose from his seat, and Sam jumped up with a scowl. I shall take more care of the secret than you do, and care is needed. He leaned forward and looked at them. Watch every shadow, he said in a low voice. Black horsemen have passed through Bree. On Monday, one came down the Greenway, they say, and another appeared later, coming up the Greenway from the south. There was a silence. At last, Frodo spoke to Pippin and Sam. I ought to have guessed it from the way the gatekeeper greeted us, he said, and the landlord seems to have heard something. Why did he press us to join the company? And why on earth did we behave so foolishly? We ought to have remained quiet in here. It would have been better, said Strider. I would have stopped your going into the common room, if I could, but the innkeeper would not let me see you, or take a message. Do you think he... began Frodo. No, I don't think any harm of old Butterbur, only he does not altogether like mysterious vagabonds of my sort. Frodo gave him a puzzled look. Well, I have a rather rascally look, have I not? Said Strider with a curl of his lip and a strange gleam in his eye. But I hope we shall get to know one another better. When we do, I hope you will explain what happened at the end of your song, or that little prank. It was a sheer accident, interrupted Frodo. I wonder, said Strider. Accident, then. That accident has made your position dangerous. Hardly more than it was already, said Frodo. I knew these horsemen were pursuing me, but now, at any rate, they seem to have missed me and to have gone away. You must not count on that, said Strider sharply. They will return, and more are coming. There are others. I know their numbers. I know these riders. He paused, and his eyes were cold and hard. And there are some folk in Bree who are not to be trusted, he went on. Bill Ferny, for instance. He has an evil name in the Bree land, and strange folk call at his house. You must have noticed him among the company, a swarthy, sneering fellow. He was very close with one of your southern strangers, and they slipped out together just after your accident. Not all of those southerners mean well, and as for Ferny, he would sell anything to anybody, or make mischief for amusement. What will Ferny sell, and what has my accident got to do with him? Said Frodo, still determined not to understand Strider's hints. News of you, of course, answered Strider. An account of your performance would be very interesting to certain people. After that, they would hardly need to be told your real name. It seems to me only too likely that they will hear of it before this night is over. Is that enough? You can do as you like about my reward. Take me as a guide or not. But I may say that I know all the lands between the Shire and the Misty Mountains, for I have wandered over them for many years. I am older than I look. I might prove useful. You will have to leave the open road after tonight, for the horsemen will watch it night and day. You may escape from Bree and be allowed to go forward while the sun is up, but you won't go far. They will come on you in the wild, in some dark place where there is no help. You wish them to find you. They are terrible. Hello, Senna, and thank you for that follow. Welcome in. How are you doing tonight? You've caught me reading The Fellowship of the Ring for the very first time. We're on chapter 10. And so, we continue. The hobbits looked at him and saw with surprise that his face was drawn as if with pain, and his hands clenched the arms of his chair. The room was very quiet and still. Hello, Jam Jam. And the light seemed to have grown dim. For a while, he sat with unseeing eyes, as if walking in distant memory or listening to sounds in the night far away. There, he cried after a moment, drawing his hand across his brow. Perhaps I know more about these pursuers than you do. You fear them, but you do not fear them enough yet. Tomorrow, you will have to escape if you can. Strider can take you by paths that are seldom trodden. Will you have him? There was a heavy silence. Frodo made no answer, and his mind was confused with doubt and fear. Sam frowned and looked at his master, and at last he broke out. With your leave, Mr. Frodo, I'd say no. This Strider here, he warns and he says take care, and I say yes to that, and let's begin with him. He comes out of the wild, and I never heard no good of such folk. He knows something, that's plain, and more than I like, but it's no reason why we should let him go leading us out of some dark place far from help, as he puts it. Pippin fidgeted and looked uncomfortable. Strider did not reply to Sam, but he turned his keen eyes to Frodo. Frodo caught his glance and looked away. No, he said slowly. I don't agree, I think. I think you are not really as you choose to look. Began to talk to me like the Bree folk, but your voice has changed. Still, Sam seems right in this. I don't see why you should warn us to take care, and yet ask us to take you on trust. Why the disguise? Who are you? What do you really know about my business, and how do you know about it? The lesson in caution has been well learned, said Strider with a grim smile. But caution is one thing and wavering is another. You will never get to Rivendell now on your own, and to trust me is your only chance. You must make up your mind. I will answer some of your questions, if that will help you to do so. But why should you believe my story if you do not trust me already? Still, here it is. At that moment, there came a knock at the door. Mr. Butterbur had arrived with candles, and behind him was Nob with cans of hot water. Strider withdrew into a dark corner. I've come to bid you good night, said the landlord, putting the candles on the table. Nob, take the water to the rooms. He came in and shut the door. It's like this, he began, hesitating and looking troubled. If I've done any harm, I'm sorry indeed. But one thing drives out another, as you'll admit, and I'm a busy man. But first, one thing and then another this week have jogged my memory, as the saying goes, and not too late, I hope. You see, I was asked to look out for hobbits of the Shire, and for one by the name of Baggins in particular. And what has that got to do with me? Asked Frodo. Ah, you know best, said the landlord knowingly. I won't give you away. But I was told this Baggins would be going by the name of Underhill, and I was given a description that fits you well enough, if I may say so. Indeed. Let's have it then, said Frodo, unwisely interrupting. Stout little fellow with red cheeks, said Mr. Butterbur solemnly. Pippin chuckled, but Sam looked indignant. That won't help you much. It goes for most hobbits. Barley, he says to me. Continued Mr. Butterbur with a glance at Pippin. But this one is taller than some and fairer than most, and he has a cleft in his chin, perky chap with a bright eye. Begging your pardon, but he said it, not me. He said it? And who was he? Asked Frodo eagerly. Ah, that was Gandalf, if you know who I mean. A wizard they say he is, but he's a good friend of mine, whether or no. But now I don't know what he'll have to say to me if I see him again. Turn all my ale sour or turn me into a block of wood. I shouldn't wonder. He's a bit hasty. Still, what's done can't be undone. Well, what have you done? Said Frodo, getting impatient with the slow unraveling of Butterbur's thoughts. Hi, Carmen. Good to see you with all your little bangaboos. Where was I? Said the landlord, pausing and snapping his fingers. Ah, yes. Old Gandalf. 3 months back, he walked right into my room without a knock. Barley, he says, I'm off in the morning. Will you do something for me? You've only to name it, I said. I am in a hurry, said he, and I've no time myself, but I want a message took to the Shire. Have you anyone you can send and trust to go? I can find someone, I said. Tomorrow, maybe, or the day after. Make it tomorrow, then, he says, and then he gave me a letter. It's addressed plain enough, said Mr. Butterbur, producing a letter from his pocket and reading out the address slowly and proudly. He valued his reputation as a lettered man. Mr. Frodo Baggins, Bag End, Hobbiton, in the Shire. A letter for me from Gandalf, cried Frodo. Ah, said Mr. Butterbur, and your right name is Baggins? Thank you, Jam Jam. It is, said Frodo, and you had better give me that letter at once and explain why you never sent it. That's what you came to tell me, I suppose, though you've taken a long time to come to the point. Such a long cat emote. Very cute. Poor Mr. Butterbur looked troubled. You're right, master, he said, and I beg your pardon. And I'm mortal afraid of what Gandalf will say, if harm comes of it. But I didn't keep it back a purpose. I put it by safe. Then I couldn't find nobody willing to go to the Shire next day, nor the day after, and none of my own folk were to spare. And then one thing after another drove it right out of my mind. I'm a busy man. I'll do what I can to set matters right, and if there's any help I can give, you've only to name it. Leaving the letter aside, I promise Gandalf no less. Barley, he says to me, this friend of mine from the Shire, he may be coming out this way before long, him and another. He'll be calling himself Underhill. Mind that, but you need ask no questions, and if I'm not with him, he may be in trouble, and he may need help. Do whatever you can for him, and I'll be grateful, he says. And here you are, and trouble is not far off, seemingly. What do you mean? Asked Frodo. These black men, he said, the landlord lowering his voice. They're looking for Baggins, and if they mean well, then I'm a hobbit. It was on Monday, and all the dogs were yammering, and geese screaming. Uncanny, I called it. Nob, he came and told me that two black men, as in cloaks, were at the door asking for a hobbit named called Baggins. Nob's hair was all stood on end. I bid the black cloak fellows be off, and slammed the door on them. But they've been asking the same question all the way to Archit, I hear. And that ranger, Strider, he's been asking questions too. Try to get in here to see you before have a bite of sup, or he did. He did, said Strider suddenly, coming forward into the light. Much trouble would have been saved if you had let him in, Barlaman. The landlord jumped with surprise. You, he cried. You're always popping up. What do you want now? He's here with my leave, said Frodo. He came to offer me his help. Well, you know your own business, maybe, said Mr. Butterbur, looking suspiciously at Strider. But if I was in your plight, I wouldn't take up with a ranger. Then who would you take up with? Asked Strider. A fat innkeeper who only remembers his own name because people shouted at him all day? They cannot stay in the pony forever, and they cannot go home. They have a long road before them. Will you go with them and keep the black-cloaked men off? Me? Leave Bree? I wouldn't do that for any money, said Mr. Butterbur, looking really scared. Why can't you stay here quiet for a bit, Mr. Underhill? What are all these strange goings-on? What are these black-cloaked men after? And where do they come from, I'd like to know. I'm sorry. I can't explain it all, answered Frodo. I am tired and very worried, and it's a long tale. But if you mean to help me, I ought to warn you that you will be in danger as long as I'm in your house. These black riders, I'm not sure, but I fear they come from. They come from Mordor, said Strider in a low voice. From Mordor, Barlaman, if that means anything to you. Save us, cried Mr. Butterbur, turning pale. The name evidently was known to him. That is the worst news that has come to Bree in my time. It is, said Frodo. Are you still willing to help me? I am, said Mr. Butterbur, more than ever. Oh, I don't know what the likes of me can do against, faltered. Against the shadow in the east, said Strider quietly. Not much, Barlaman, but every little bit helps. You can let Mr. Underhill stay here tonight as Mr. Underhill, and you can forget the name of Baggins till he is far away. I'll do that, said Butterbur, but they'll find out he's here without help from me, I'm afraid. It's a pity Mr. Baggins drew attention to himself this evening, to say no more. The story of that Mr. Bilbo's going off has been heard before tonight in Bree. Even our knob has been doing some guessing in his slow pate, and there are others in Bree quicker in the uptake than he is. Well, we can only hope the riders won't come back yet, said Frodo. I hope not indeed, said Butterbur, but spooks or no spooks, they won't get in the pony so easy. Don't you worry till the morning. Nob will say no word. No black-cloaked men shall pass my doors while I can stand on my legs. Me and my folk will keep watch tonight, but you had best get some sleep, if you can. In any case, we must be called at dawn, said Frodo. We must get off as early as possible. Breakfast at 6:30, please. I'm sorry. I love hobbits. Just, we have to leave as soon as we can. Breakfast? Right. I'll see to the order, said the landlord. Good night, Mr. Baggins. Underhill, I should say. Good night. Now, bless me, where is your Mr. Brandybuck? I don't know, said Frodo with a sudden anxiety. I had forgotten all about Mary, and it was getting late. I'm afraid he is out. He said something about going for a breath of air. Well, you don't want looking after, and no mistake. Your party might be on holiday, said Butterbur. I must go and bar the doors quick, but I'll see your friend is let in when he comes. I'd better send Nob to look for him. Good night to you all. At last, Mr. Butterbur went out, with another doubtful look at Strider and a shake of his head. His footsteps retreated down the passage. And with that, I'm going to take a little bit of a break. I'm going to drink some water, relax the throat, and then be back to read you some more. Be right back. again. Well, said Strider, when are you going to open that letter? Frodo looked carefully at the seal before he broke it. It seemed certainly to be Gandalf's. Inside, written in the wizard's strong but graceful script, was the following message. Prancing Pony, free, Mid-Year's Day, Shire Year 1418. Dear Frodo, bad news has reached me here. I must go off at once. You had better leave Bag End soon and get out of the Shire before the end of July at latest. I will return as soon as I can, and I will follow you if I find that you are gone. Leave a message for me here if you pass through Bree. You can trust the landlord, Butterbur. You may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, a lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There, I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Do not use it again. Not for any reason whatever. Do not travel by night. P.P.S. Make sure that it is the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken. A light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be a blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. P.P.P.S. I hope Butterbur sends this promptly. A worthy man, but his memory is like a lumber room. Thing wanted always be buried. If he forgets, I shall roast him. Farewell. Frodo read the letter to himself, and then passed it to Pippin and Sam. Really, old Butterbur has made a mess of things, he said. He deserves roasting. If I had caught this at once, we might all have been safe by Rivendell by now. But what can have happened to Gandalf? He writes as if he was going into great danger. He has been doing that for many years, said Strider. Frodo turned and looked at him thoughtfully, wondering about Gandalf's second postscript. Why didn't you tell me you were Gandalf's friend at once? He asked. It would have saved time. Would it? Would any of you have believed me till now? Said Strider. I knew nothing of this letter. For all I knew, I had to persuade you to trust me without proofs, if I was to help you. In any case, I did not intend to tell you about myself at once. I had to study you first, to make sure of you. The enemy has set traps for me before now. As soon as I had made up my mind, I was ready to tell you whatever you asked. But I must admit, he added with a strange laugh, that I hoped you would take me for my own sake. A hunted man sometimes wearies of distrust and longs for friendship. Then, I believe my looks are against me. They are, at first sight at any rate. Hi, Luxie. Long time no see. How have you been? How's your job been going? I hope you've been able to rest easy. Hello, hello. Very tiring? Oh, I feel that. Very, very deeply. But what can we do? They are, at first sight at any rate, laughed Pippin with sudden relief after reading Gandalf's letter. But handsome is as handsome does, as we say in the Shire. Unable to sleep without my voice. That's very sweet of you. Looks like you'll be sleeping very well tonight then. Handsome's is as handsome does, as we say in the Shire, and I dare say we shall all look much the same after lying for days in hedges and ditches. It would take more than a few days, or weeks, or years of wandering in the wilds to make you look like Strider, he answered. And you would die first, unless you're made of sterner stuff than you look to be. 5 a.m., so you're really excited for this 3 hours of sleep? Goodness gracious. Well, I'm glad to help out as I can, but goodness, you need more sleep. But also, fair enough. Let's help you as we can. Pippin subsided, but Sam was not daunted, and he still eyed Strider dubiously. You're very afraid to sleep? Why's that? How do we know you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about? He demanded. You never mentioned Gandalf till this letter came out. You might be a play-acting spy. Heart disease? That's understandable then. I'm sorry. That's rough to live with. Trying to get us to go with you. He might have done in the real Strider and took his clothes. What have you to say to that? That you are a stout fellow, answered Strider. But I am afraid my only answer to you, Sam Gamgee, is this. If I had killed the real Strider, I could kill you. And I should have killed you already without so much talk. If I was after the ring, I could have it now. He stood up and seemed suddenly to grow taller. In his eyes gleamed a light, keen and commanding. Throwing back his cloak, he laid his hand on the hilt of a sword that had hung concealed by his side. They did not dare to move. Sam sat wide-mouthed, staring at him dumbly. But I am the real Strider, fortunately, he said, looking down at them with his face softened by a sudden smile. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and if by life or death I can save you, I will. There was a long silence. At last, Frodo spoke with hesitation. I believed that you were a friend before the letter came, he said. Or, at least I wish to. You have frightened me several times tonight, but never in the way that servants of the enemy would, or so I imagine. I think one of his spies would, well, seem fairer and feel fouler, if you understand. I see, laughed Strider. I look foul and feel fair, is that it? All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. These verses apply to you, then? Asked Frodo. I could not make out what they were about. But how did you know they were in Gandalf's letter, if you've never seen it? I did not know, he answered. But I am Aragorn, and those verses go with that name. He drew out his sword, and they saw that the blade was indeed broken, a foot below the hilt. Not for much use, is it, Sam? Said Strider. But the time is near when it shall be forged anew. Sam said nothing. Well, said Strider, with Sam's permission, we will call that settled. Strider shall be your guide. And now I think it is time you went to bed and took what rest you can. We shall have a rough road tomorrow. Even if we are allowed to leave Bree unhindered, we can hardly hope now to leave it unnoticed. But I shall try to get lost as soon as possible. I know one or two ways out of Breeland other than the main road. If once we shake off pursuit, I shall make for Weathertop. Weathertop, said Sam. What's that? It is a hill just north of the road, about halfway from here to Rivendell. It commands a wide view all around, and there we shall have a chance to look about us. Gandalf will make for that point, if he follows us. After Weathertop, our journey will become more difficult, and we shall have to choose between various dangers. When did you last see Gandalf? Asked Frodo. Do you know where he is, or what he's doing? Strider looked grave. I do not know, he said. I came west with him in the spring. I have often kept watch on the borders of the Shire the last few years, and he was busy elsewhere. He seldom left it unguarded. Last met on the 1st of May at Sarn Ford down the Brandywine. He told me that his business with you had gone well and that you would be starting for Rivendell in the last week of September. As I knew he was at your side, I went away on a journey of my own, and that has proved ill, for plainly some news has reached him, and I was not at hand to help. I am troubled for the first time since I've known him. We should have had messages, even if he had not come himself. When I returned many days ago, I heard the ill news. Tidings had gone far and wide that Gandalf was missing and the horsemen had been seen. It was the elven folk of Gildor that told me this, and later they told me that you had left your home, but there was no news of you leaving Buckland. I have been watching the East Road anxiously. Do you think the Black Riders have anything to do with it? With Gandalf's absence, I mean, asked Frodo. I do not know if anything else could have hindered him, except the enemy himself, said Strider. But do not give up hope. Gandalf is greater than you Shire folk know. As a rule, you can only see his jokes and toys, but this business of ours will be his greatest task. Pippin yawned. I'm sorry, but I am dead tired. In spite of all the danger and worry, I must go to bed, or sleep where I sit. Where is that silly fellow, Merry? It would be the last straw if we had to go out into the dark and look for him. At that moment, they heard a door slam, then feet came running along the passage. Merry came in with a rush, followed by Nob. He shut the door hastily and leaned against it. He was out of breath. They stared at him in alarm for a moment before he gasped. I've seen them, Frodo. I've seen them. Black Riders. Black Riders? Cried Frodo. Where? Here, in the village. I stayed indoors for an hour. Then, as you did not come back, I went out for a stroll. I had come back again and was standing just outside the light of the lamp, looking at the stars. Suddenly, I shivered and felt that something horrible was creeping near. There was a sort of deeper shade among the shadows on the field, just across the edge of the lamplight. It slid away at once to the dark without a sound. There was no horse. Which way did it go? Asked Strider, suddenly and sharply. Merry started, noticing the stranger for the first time. Go on, said Frodo. This is a friend of Gandalf's. I will explain later. It seemed to make off up the road, eastward, continued Merry. I tried to follow. Of course, vanished almost at once. But I went around the corner and on as far as the last house to the road. Strider looked at Mary with wonder. You have a stout heart, he said, but it was foolish. I don't know, said Mary. Neither brave nor silly, I think. I could hardly help myself. I seemed to be drawn somehow. Anyway, I went, and suddenly I heard voices by the hedge. One was muttering, and the other was whispering, or hissing. I couldn't hear a word that was said. It did not creep any closer, because I began to tremble all over. Then I felt terrified, and I turned back, and was just about to bolt home, when something came behind me and I fell over. I found him, sir, put in Nob. Mr. Butterbur sent me out with a lantern. I went down to Westgate, and then back up towards Southgate. Just nigh Bill Fernie's house, I thought I could see something in the road. I couldn't swear to it, but it looked to me as if two men were stooping over something, lifting it. I gave a shout, but when I got up to the spot there were no signs of them, and only Mr. Brandybuck lying on by the roadside. He seemed to be asleep. I thought I had fallen into deep water, he says to me when I shook him. Very strange he was, and as soon as I had roused him, he got up and ran back here like a hare. I'm afraid that's true, said Mary, though I don't know what I said. I had an ugly dream which I can't remember. I went to pieces. I don't know what came over me. I do, said Strider. The black breath. The riders must have left their horses outside and passed back to the south gate in secret. They will know all the news now, for they have visited Bill Fernie, and probably that southerner was a spy as well. Something may happen in the night before we leave Bree. What will happen? Said Mary. Will they attack the inn? No, I think not, said Strider. They are not all here yet, and in any case, that is not their way. In dark and loneliness they are strongest. They will not openly attack a house where there are lights and many people, not until they are desperate. Not while all the long leagues of Eriador still lie before us. But their power is in terror, and some already in Bree are in their clutch. They will drive these wretches to some evil work. Fernie and some of the strangers, and maybe the gatekeeper too. They had words with Harry at Westgate on Monday. I was watching them. He was white and shaking when they left him. We seem to have enemies all around, said Frodo. What are we to do? Stay here and do not go into your rooms. They are sure to have found out which those are. The Hobbit rooms have windows looking north and close to the ground. We will all remain together and bar this window and the door. But first, Nob and I will fetch your luggage. While Strider was gone, Frodo gave Mary a rapid account of all that had happened since supper. Mary was still reading and pondering Gandalf's letter when Strider and Nob returned. Well, master, said Nob, I've ruffled up the clothes and put in a bolster down the middle of each bed. And I made a nice imitation of your head with the brown woolen mat, Mr. Underhill, sir, he added with a grin, and laughed. Very lifelike, he says. But what will happen when they have penetrated the disguise? We shall see, said Strider. Let us hope to hold the fort till morning. Good night to you, said Nob, and went off to take his part in the watch on the doors. Their bags and gear they piled on the parlor floor. They pushed a low chair against the door and shut the window. Peering out, Frodo saw the night was still clear. The sickle, opposite name for a plow or great bear, was swinging bright above the shoulders of Bree Hill. He then closed and barred the heavy inside shutters and drew the curtains together. Strider built up the fire and blew out all the candles. The hobbits lay down on their blankets and with their feet towards the hearth, but Strider himself settled in a chair against the door. They talked for a little, for Mary still had several questions to ask. Jumped over the moon, chuckled Mary, as he rolled himself in his blanket. Very ridiculous of you, Frodo, but I wish I had been there to see. The worthies of Bree will be discussing it 100 years hence. I hope so, said Strider. And then they all fell silent, and one by one, the hobbits drifted off to sleep. And that is the end of chapter 10. I have to say, it's very interesting just reading through and enjoying it. Just encountering Strider for the first time, and what a wily person. It's like, yeah, I know. I know I'm rugged and unkempt, but I'm the best help you have. I didn't know it was in the letter, but I do know you need me. Well, let's continue on to chapter 11. A knife in the dark. As they prepared for sleep in the inn at Bree, darkness lay on Buckland. A mist strayed in the dells and along the river bank. The house at Crick Hollow stood silent. Matty Bulger opened the door cautiously and peered out. A feeling of fear had been growing on him all day, and he was unable to rest or go to bed. There was a brooding threat in the breathless night air. As he stared out into the gloom, a black shadow moved under the trees. The gate seemed to open of its own accord and close again without a sound. Terror seized him. He shrank back, and for a moment he stood trembling in the hall. Then he shut and locked the door. The night deepened. There came the soft sound of horses led with stealth along the lane. Outside the gate, they stopped, and 3 figures entered, like shades of night creeping across the ground. One went to the door, one to the corner of the house on either side, and there they stood, as still as shadows of stones, while night went slowly on. The house and the quiet trees seemed to be waiting breathlessly. There was a faint stir in the leaves, and a cock crowed far away. Cold hour of dawn before dawn was passing. The figure by the door moved. In the dark without moon or stars, a drawn blade gleamed, as if a chill light had been unsheathed. There was a blow, soft but heavy, and the door shuddered. Open, in the name of Mordor, said a voice, thin and menacing. At a second blow, the door yielded and fell back, with timbers burst and lock broken. The dark figures passed swiftly in. At that moment, among the trees nearby, a horn rang out. It rent the night like fire on a hilltop. Awake, hear, fire, foes, awake. Eddie Bulger had not been idle. As soon as he saw the dark shades creep from the garden, he knew that he must run for it, or perish. And run he did, out of the back door, through the garden, and over the fields. When he reached the nearest house no more than a mile away, he collapsed on the doorstep. "No, no, no," he was crying. "No, not me. I haven't got it." It was some time before anyone could make out what he was babbling about. At last, they got the idea that enemies were in Buckland, some strange invasion from the old forest, and then they lost no more time. Fear, fire, foes. The brandy bucks were blowing the horn call of Buckland that they had not been sounded for 100 years, not since the white wolves came in the fell winter when the brandy wine was frozen over. Awake, awake. Far away answering horns were heard. The alarm was spreading. The black figures fled from the house. One of them let fall a hobbit cloak on the step as he ran. In the lane, the noise of hoofs broke out, and gathering to a gallop, went hammering away into the darkness. All about Crick Hollow, there was the sound of horns blowing, and voices crying and feet running. The black riders rode like a gale to the north gate. Let the little people blow. Sauron would deal with them later. Meanwhile, they had another errand. They knew now that the house was empty and the ring had gone. They rode down the guards at the gate and vanished from the Shire. In the early night, Frodo woke from deep sleep suddenly, as if some sound or presence had disturbed him. He saw that Strider was sitting alert in his chair. His eyes gleamed in the night at the fire, which had been tended and was burning brightly, but he made no sign or movement. Had to sneeze. Frodo soon went to sleep again, but his dreams were again troubled with the noise of wind and of galloping hooves. The wind seemed to be curling round the house and shaking it. Far off, he heard a horn blowing wildly. He opened his eyes and heard a cock crowing lustily in the inn-yard. Strider had drawn the curtains and pushed back the shutters with a clang. The first gray light of day was in the room, and a cold air was coming through the open window. As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping, and the beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung open upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. Strider immediately went to fetch the landlord. Poor Mr. Butterbird looked sleepy and frightened. He'd hardly closed his eyes all night, so he said, but he had never heard a sound. "Never has such a thing happened in my time," he cried, raising his hands in horror. "Guests unable to sleep in their beds, and good bolsters ruined and all. What are we coming to?" "Dark times," said Strider. "For the present, you may be left in peace. When you have got rid of us, we will leave at once. Never mind about breakfast. A drink and a bite standing will have to do. We shall be packed in a few minutes." Mr. Butterbur hurried off to see their ponies were got ready and to fetch them a bite. Very soon he came back in dismay. The ponies had vanished. The stable doors had all been opened in the night, and they were gone. Not only Mary's ponies, but every other horse and beast in place. Frodo was crushed by the news. How could they hope to reach Rivendell on foot, pursued by mounted enemies? They might as well set out for the moon. Strider sat silent for a while, looking at the hobbits, as if he was weighing up their strength and courage. Ponies would not help us escape horsemen, he said, at last thoughtfully, as if he guessed what Frodo had in mind. We should not go much slower on foot, not on the roads that I mean to take. I was going to walk in any case. It is the food in stores that trouble me. We cannot count on getting anything to eat between here and Rivendell, except what we can take with us, and we ought to take plenty to spare, for we may be delayed or forced to go roundabout, far out of the direct way. How much are you prepared to carry on your backs? As much as we must, said Pippin with a sinking heart, but trying to show that he was tougher than he looked or felt. I can carry enough for two, said Sam defiantly. Can't anything be done, Mr. Butterbur? Asked Frodo. Can we get a couple of ponies in the village, or even just one for the baggage? I don't suppose we could hire them, but we might be able to buy them, he added, doubtfully, wondering if he could afford it. I doubt it, said the landlord unhappily. 2 or 3 riding ponies that there were in Bree were stabled in my yard, and they're gone. As for the other animals, horses or ponies for draught or whatnot, there are very few of them in Bree, and they won't be for sale, but I'll do what I can. I'll rout out Bob and send him round as soon as may be. Yes, said Strider reluctantly. You had better do that. I'm afraid we shall have to try to get one pony at least. But so ends all hopes of starting early and slipping away quietly. We might as well have blown a horn to announce our departure. That was part of their plan, no doubt. There is one crumb of comfort, said Mary, and more than a crumb, I hope. We can have breakfast while we wait, and sit down to it. Let's get hold of Nob. Oh, these hobbits. So silly. Well, at least we can have breakfast. That's one silver lining. It's all dour and scary and like, oh no, everything's going wrong, and at least we can eat. Man after my heart. It is always good to find the silver lining wherever we can. In the end, there was more than 3 hours delay. Bob came back with the report that no horse or pony was to be got for love or money in the neighborhood, except one. Bill Ferny had one that he might possibly sell. A poor old half-starved creature it is, said Bob, but he won't part with it for less than thrice its worth, seeing how you're placed. Not if I knows Bill Ferny. Bill Ferny, said Frodo. Isn't there some trick? Wouldn't the beast bolt back to him with all our stuff, or help in tracking us or something? I wonder, said Strider, but I cannot imagine any animal running home to him once it got away. I fancy this is only an afterthought of kind Master Ferny's. just a way of increasing his profits from the affair. The chief danger is that the poor beast is probably at death's door, but there does not seem any choice. What does he want for it? Bill Furney's price was 12 silver pennies, and that was indeed at least 3 times the pony's value in those parts. It proved to be a bony, underfed, and dispirited animal. But it did not look like dying just yet. Mr. Butterbur paid for it himself and offered Mary another 18 pence as some compensation for the lost animals. He was an honest man and well off as things were reckoned in Bree, but 30 silver pennies was a sore blow to him, and being cheated by Bill Furney made it harder to bear. As a matter of fact, he came out on the right side in the end. It turned out later that only one of the horses had actually been stolen. The others had been driven off, or had bolted in terror, and were found wandering in different corners of the Bree land. Mary's ponies had escaped altogether, and eventually, having a good deal of sense, they made their way to the downs in search of Fatty Lumpkin. Of course they did. So they came under the care of Tom Bombadil for a while, and were well off. But when news of the events at Bree came to Tom's ears, he sent them to Mr. Butterbur, who thus got 5 good beasts at a very fair price. They had to work harder in Bree, but Bob treated them well, so on the whole, they were lucky. They missed a dark and dangerous journey, but they never came to Rivendell. However, in the meanwhile, for all Mr. Butterbur knew his money was gone for good or for bad, and he had other troubles, for there was a great commotion as soon as the remaining guests were astir and heard the news of the raid on the inn. The southern travelers had lost several horses and blamed the innkeeper loudly, until it became known that one of their own number had also disappeared in the night. None other than Bill Furney's squint-eyed companion. Suspicion fell on him at once. "If you pick up with a horse thief and bring him to my house," said Butterbur angrily, "you ought to pay for all the damage yourselves and not come shouting at me. Go and ask Furney where your handsome friend is." But it appeared that he was nobody's friend, and nobody could recollect when he had joined their party. Interesting. After their breakfast, the hobbits had to repack and get together further supplies for the longer journey they were now expecting. It was close to 10 o'clock before they at last got off. By that time, the whole of Bree was buzzing with excitement. Widow's vanishing trick, the appearance of the Dark Horseman, the robbing of the stables, and last but not least, news that Strider the Ranger had joined the mysterious hobbits, made such a tale as would last for many uneventful years. Most of the inhabitants of Bree and Staddle, and many even from Combe and Archet, were crowded in the road to see the travelers start. The other guests in the inn were at the doors or hanging out of the windows. Strider had changed his mind and had decided to leave Bree by the main road. Any attempt to set off country at once would only make matters worse. Half the inhabitants would follow them to see what they were up to and to prevent them from trespassing. They said farewell to Nob and Bob and took leave of Mr. Butterbur with many thanks. "I hope we shall meet again some day, when things are merry once more," said Frodo. "I should like nothing better than to stay in your house in peace for a while." Tramped off, anxious and downhearted, under the eyes of the crowd. Not all the faces were friendly, nor all the words that were shouted But Strider seemed to be held in awe by most of the Brelanders, and those that he stared at shut their mouths and drew away. He walked in front with Frodo. Next came Merry and Pippin, and at last came Sam leading the pony, which was laden with as much of their baggage as they had the heart to give it, but already it looked far less dejected, as if it approved of the change in its fortunes. Sam was chewing an apple thoughtfully. He had a pocket full of them, a parting present from Nob and Bob. Apples for walking and a pipe for sitting, he said, but I reckon I'll miss them before long. The hobbits took no notice of the inquisitive heads that peeped out of the doors, or hopped over the walls and fences as they passed. But as they drew near the further gate, Frodo saw a dark, ill-kept house behind a thick hedge, the last house in the village. In one of the windows, he caught a glimpse of a sallow face with sly, slanting eyes, but it vanished at once. So that's where the southerner is hiding, he thought. He looks more like half like a goblin. Over the hedge, another man was staring boldly. He had heavy black brows and dark, scornful eyes. His large mouth curled in a sneer. He was smoking a short black pipe. As they approached, he took it out of his mouth and spat. "Mornin', Longshanks," he said. "Off early. Found some friends at last." Strider nodded, but he did not answer. "Morning, my little friends," he said to the others. "I suppose you know who we've taken up with. That sticks at not Strider, that is. Though I've heard other names not so pretty. Watch out tonight. And you, Sammy, don't go ill-treating my poor old pony. Ha!" He spat again. Sam turned quickly. "And you, Fernie," he said, "put your ugly face out of sight or it will get hurt." With a sudden flick, quick as lightning, an apple left his hand and hit Bill square on the nose. He ducked too late, and curses came from behind the hedge. "Waste of a good apple," said Sam regretfully, and strode on. Damn. That was savage. Literally said, "You know what? You suck, and you're ugly," and then hit him in the face with an apple. Wow, where was that scene? Goodness gracious. At last, they left the village behind. The escort of children and stragglers that had followed them got tired and turned back at the south gate. Passing through, they kept on along the road for some miles. It bent to the left, curving back into its eastward line. As it was rounded the feet of Bree Hill, and then began to run swiftly downwards into wooded country. To their left, they could see some of the houses and hobbit holes of Staddle on the gentler southern eastern slopes of the hill. Down in the deep hollow, away north of the road, where there were wisps of rising smoke that showed where Combe lay, or Chet was hidden in the trees beyond. After the road had run down some way, they had left Bree Hill standing and Brown behind. They came on a narrow track that led off towards the north. "This is where we leave the open and take to cover," said Strider. "Not a shortcut, I hope," said Pippin. "Our last shortcut through the woods nearly ended in disaster." "Ah, but you had not got me with you then," laughed Strider. "My cuts, short or long, don't go wrong." He took a look up and down the road. No one was in sight, and he led the way quickly down towards the wooded valley. His plan, as far as they could understand it without knowing the country, was to go towards Archet at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then to steer as straight as he could over the wild lands to Weathertop Hill. In that way, they would, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further on bends southwards to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But, of course, they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. However, in the meanwhile, walking was not unpleasant. Indeed, if it had not been for the disturbing events of the night before, they would have enjoyed this part of the journey better than any up to that time. The sun was shining, clear but not too hot. The woods in the valley were still leafy and full of color, and seemed peaceful and wholesome. Strider guided them confidently among the many crossing paths. Although left to themselves, they would soon have been at a loss. He was taking a wandering course with many turns and doublings to put off any pursuit. It is interesting that a week ago or so, I was actually watching an episode of Mythbusters, where the myth was you could not walk in a straight line if you were blinded and deafened. And it turns out that was completely true. And of course, they tested it in a forest as well, trying to go from one place to another. Turns out that Jamie, the walrus man, he had military training, of course, so he was able to find his way, no problem, as he had techniques in order to keep his way going forward. But Adam, on the other hand, untrained in the ways of the wild, found himself very lost very, very quickly. And I thought that was interesting and powerful. You'd think it'd be easy to just keep going north, but sometimes it's just very easy to lose your way, especially in a place like a forest. Remember to be careful, everyone. Bill Fernie will have watched where we left the road for certain, he said, though I don't think he will follow us himself. He knows the land round here well enough, but he knows he is not a match for me in the wood. It is what he may tell others that I am afraid of. I don't suppose they are far away. If they think we have made for Archet, so much the better. Whether because of Strider's skill, or for some other reason, they saw no sign or heard no sound of any other living thing all that day. Neither two-footed, except birds, neither four-footed, except one fox and a few squirrels. The next day, they began to steer a steady course eastwards, and still all was quiet and peaceful. On the third day out of Bree, they came out of the Chetwood. The land had been falling steadily ever since they turned aside from the road, and they now entered a wide, flat expanse of the country, much more difficult to manage. They were far from beyond the borders of the Bree land, out in the pathless wilderness, and drawing near the Midgewater marshes. Ground now became damp, and in places boggy, and here there came upon pools and wide stretches of reeds and rushes filled with the warbling of little hidden birds. They had to pick their way carefully to keep both dry-footed and their proper course. At first, they made fair progress, but as they went on, their passage became slower and more dangerous. The marshes were bewildering and treacherous, and there was no permanent trail even for rangers to find through their shifting quagmires. Flies began to torment them, and the air was full of clouds of tiny midges that crept up their sleeves and breeches and into their hair. I am being eaten alive, cried Pippin. Midge water. There are more midges than water. What do they live on when they can't get Hobbit? Asked Sam, scratching his neck. They spent a miserable day in this lonely and unpleasant country. Their camping place was damp, cold, and uncomfortable, and the biting insects would not let them sleep. There were also abominable creatures haunting the reeds, and tussocks that from the sound of them were evil relatives of the cricket. Thank you, Solar. Working on assignments, but hope rest of stream goes well. Thank you. I hope your assignment goes well, and I'll get to recording those lines soon for you. How soon do you need them by the way? Just so I have a time frame. Angel, you say. Well, this angel is always glad to say hello to the lovely goddess, the sun. Let's see. There were thousands of them, and they squeaked all round. Neek breek, breek neek, unceasingly all the night, until the hobbits were nearly frantic. The next day, the 4th, was little better, and the night almost as comfortless, though the Neeker-breakers, as Sam called them, had been left behind. The midges still pursued them. Project is due the 5th of December. It's fine. It's good practice. So, you'll hear from me soon. As Frodo lay, tired but unable to close his eyes, it seemed to him that far away there came a light in the eastern sky. It flashed and faded many times. It was not the dawn, for that was still some hours off. What is that light? He said to Strider, who had risen and was standing gazing ahead into the night. Bow wow. I do not know, Strider answered. It is too distant to make out. It is like lightning that leaps up from the hilltops. Frodo lay down again, but for a long while he could still see the white flashes, and against them the tall, dark figure of Strider, standing silent and watchful. At last, he passed into uneasy sleep. Sounds good, Solar. Enjoy your lurk. They had not gone far on the 5th day when they left the last straggling pools and reed beds of the marshes behind them. The land before them began steadily to rise again. Away in the distance eastward, they could now see a line of hills. The highest of them was at the right of the line and a little separated from the others. It had a conical top, slightly flattened at the summit. That is Weathertop, said Strider. The old road which we have left far away on our right runs to the south of it and passes not far from its foot. We might reach it by noon tomorrow if we go straight towards it. I suppose we had better do so. What do you mean? Asked Frodo. I mean, when we do get there, it is not certain where we shall find. It is close to the road. But surely we were hoping to find Gandalf there. Yes, but the hope is faint. If he comes this way at all, he may not pass through Bree, and so he may not know what we are doing. And anyway, unless by luck we arrive almost together, we shall miss one another. It will not be safe for him or for us to wait there long. If the riders fail to find us in the wilderness, they are likely to make for Weathertop themselves. It commands a wide view all around. Indeed, there are many birds and beasts in this country that could see us as we stand here from that hilltop. Not all the birds are to be trusted, and there are other spies more evil than they are. The hobbits looked anxiously at the distant hills. Sam looked up into the pale sky, fearing to see hawks or eagles hovering over them with bright, unfriendly eyes. You two make me feel uncomfortable and lonesome, Strider, he said. What do you advise us to do? Asked Frodo. I think, answered Strider slowly, as if he was not quite sure. I think the best thing is to go as straight eastward from here as we can to make for the line of hills, not for Weathertop. There we can strike a path I know that runs at their feet. It will bring us to Weathertop, the north, and less openly. Then we shall see what we shall see. All that day they plodded along until the cold and nearly evening came down. The land became drier and more barren, but mists and vapors lay behind them on the marshes. A few melancholy birds were piping and wailing until the round red sun sank slowly into the western shadows. Then an empty silence fell. The hobbits thought of the soft light of sunset glancing through the cheerful windows of Bag End far away. At the day's end, they came to a stream that wandered down from the hills to lose itself in the stagnant marshland, and they went up along its banks while the light lasted. It was already night when at last they halted and made their camp under some stunted alder trees by the shores of the stream. Ahead, there loomed now against the dusky sky the bleak and treeless backs of the hills. That night, they set a watch, and Strider, it seemed, did not sleep at all. The moon was waxing, and in the early night hours, a cold gray light lay on the land. Next morning, they set again after sunrise. There was a frost in the air, and the sky was a pale, clear blue. The hobbits felt refreshed, as if they had had a night of unbroken sleep. Already, they were getting used to much walking on short commons, shorter at any rate than what in the Shire they would have been. They would have thought barely enough to keep them on their legs. Pippin declared that Frodo was looking twice the hobbit that he had been. Very odd, said Frodo, tightening his belt, considering that there is actually a good deal less of me. I hope the thinning process will not go on indefinitely, or I shall become a wraith. Do not speak of such things, said Strider quickly, and with surprising earnestness. I certainly did have quite the run-in with wraiths, that's for sure. Much more is left. Ooh, that is a long chapter. I think with that, I will go ahead and end reading the book for tonight. We can always pick this back up again tomorrow. What's today again? Today is Wednesday, that's right. So, Thursday, we'll come and go. We'll do more of the same. We could do something special on Friday, though. I think that would be nice. Play a game, perhaps a horror game. Maybe. We'll think about it. See what the others might want. For now, though, I just want to say have a wonderful night. Rest easy, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, lovelies.